Most of us have come to accept Scotland for what it is. Beautiful, dramatic, but large areas are barren. This emptiness is almost always observed on the tops of the hills, its mountainsides. When I talk about emptiness, I'm describing the lack of diverse vegetation of the plants which make up the higher altitudes in Scotland. It's typically grasses, heathers, different berries and flowers, but almost never trees. Have you ever wondered why that is? Could there be trees hiding away, and should there be a whole lot more? Well, in this video, we're going to be going on something of a wee pilgrimage. We're going to be heading to one of the last known remnants of Scotland's forgotten Highland forests. I'm going to try and get behind this single tree here for a bit of wind cover. It's not really working. If you've been following the videos in Scotland, you'll know that there's been a few current themes and ideas that are reoccurring. And one of those ideas is the shifting baseline syndrome. I've talked about this on the channel previously, but let's talk about it again in case you forgot. Because essentially, as humans, we like to forget things. And that's what the shifting baseline syndrome is. With each new generation, we're born into this life and we see the landscape for what it is. We see this life for what it is, and we're all too ready to accept it as how it is. But if you think about it, this is such a flawed way of thinking, because nothing in life stays the same. It's either regenerating or it's degenerating, it's degrading. And I think in the case of the Scottish landscape, it's fair enough to say that for a long time now, it's been degrading. And the absolute epitome of this, the absolute best example I think we have of this in the UK, is that we've forgotten an entire habitat, mountain birch. A lot gets said about Caledonian pine forest here in Scotland, and yes, while this is a very important habitat and it would have been once very extensive, it is just one of the 3 layers of woodland cover which really should be making its way up the hills. So down in the lower parts of the glens, you should have Caledonian pine forest, and then higher up on the hill, this is where you get mountain birch, this is where you get the belt, and then on the very tops of the hills, this is where you get your really scrubby woodland habitat. So it's made up of like junipers, willows, birch as well. And if it's not there, if this generation has forgot, how do we know that this should be the case? Well, if we look over to Scandinavia, in countries like Norway, Sweden and Denmark, you can find these 3 habitats forming on the hillsides. In the southwest of Norway, the climatic and the geological conditions are almost identical to that of Scotland, to that of the Highlands, and there they have this habitat. The hills are covered in regenerating forests. I've read that here that mountain birch can grow up to 1,600 meters, which I think is taller than any mountain that you have in Scotland. So for anyone that says that trees can't grow at these altitudes in Scotland, they definitely can. They've shared a pretty similar history all the way from the Neolithic period up to about the 18th century, with humans beginning to practice agriculture in these 2 parts of the world around the same time. And what came with that was the clearance of natural habitats, of woodlands, and the ingress of grazing animals. And of course, in both countries, there was a pretty intense persecution of their natural predators, of their apex predators, wolves, bears, and lynx. But over the course of the last few centuries, this is where the country's histories begin to differ. What happened is that here in Scotland, hunting and agriculture continued to develop, if you will. It kind of took over the landscape. It created this monopoly. You not only had really high numbers of grazers, but you also started to have really high numbers of deer on the land as well. And also things like burning the hills to maintain it for grouse hunting, it only increased the pressure on the landscape and limited the natural regeneration of trees. Whereas in Norway, there just wasn't this need, this desire to hunt. And agriculture, farming, well, it began to decline around the time of the late 19th century, and this meant that the land, well, it didn't have the same grazing pressures and it was able to recover. And over the course of the last century, forests in Norway have been booming, and that's including mountain birch. So you must be thinking, if Scotland limited grazing pressure down to, like, you know, normal levels, would mountain birch recover? Well, not exactly. But before we get into that and I explain why, I just want to pay homage to my footwear. Before heading to Scotland, Vivo Barefoot equipped me and my family with new footwear so we could explore as nature intended. So I've got two young kids, both toddlers, they're waddling around right now, and they have got perfect feet. I've been unspoiled by years of wearing traditional shoes. And when they're in Vivos, this allows their tiny feet to properly develop, gaining strength and importantly staying dry during these cold winter months. So I'm actually wearing two different Vivos at the minute. They're both trackers. These are my trusty forest trackers, and these are the new textile trackers. If you don't like wearing leather, there's so many options. It's so important to be aware that modern hiking boots actually negate the natural functioning of our feet. I've actually never worn proper hiking boots because I always found them to be too rigid, too bulky, too hard. I always used to wear trainers and my feet would just end up getting really wet and really cold. Whereas with Vivos, your feet have space to move and get stronger while staying warm and dry. Honestly, with Vivos, there's no break-in period. However, if it's your first time wearing barefoot shoes, don't go for a 100-mile hike as your feet might need time to adapt. You know, we've forgotten how our feet should be and we've forgotten how the landscape should look. We've forgotten an entire habitat. Oh, the skies begin to darken and this is going to be a very good test of the Vivos. As fun as this is, it's really important to remember that accidents happen, and when you're out walking on your own, just take care. And yes, if you're wondering, I am coming back to get the camera. We're in the clouds now. Whew. The shoes fit great. The one thing that's annoying me is the trousers. Might have to lose the trousers, reweld the thighs as well as the toes. You look across the landscape and it is naked, it's empty, there's very little vegetation above the knee, and it makes you wonder, should it even be here? You know, it's very easy to fall into this trap of thinking that Scotland's hills should be empty. But every now and again you get the odd pine that's growing, you know, and you can see them coming up. So trees, they can grow up here, but I think we've got to go up just a little bit further to get to our birch. And there they are, just clinging to the side of the hill there. Just over there. I didn't bring any food with me, but I did bring a magic mind. I can safely say this will be the highest place anyone's ever drunk a magic mind in the UK. To give us the energy we need to keep going. Okay, so what is mountain birch and why would we love to see it return? Well, while birches are the dominant species in this habitat, other species like rowan and aspen are also really important. These are trees which have genetically adapted to the harsher, colder conditions of living at higher altitudes. Because of the strong winds, they're often twisted, gnarled, growing horizontally. They're trees with character that form quite a scrubby and open woodland. These images you're seeing are from southwest Norway, and it really gives us an idea of what we've lost, but what could come back. We'd love to see it because ecologically it would revitalise Scotland's empty hills. It'd bring balance back to a depleted system, but we'd also love to actually see it. And by this I mean we've become so used to seeing empty hills without any trees. What an amazing change it would be to see woodlands climbing the mountains once again. I think culturally it would capture people's imaginations and wake many of us up to what's missing. Mountain birch in Scotland is extinct. Apart from a few known trees like this, it's all gone. In helping this habitat recover, the first step is identifying where these trees are. If you think you've seen a mountain birch or any high altitude native trees, you can submit a record here on the Reforesting Scotland website. The second step is collecting seed from these trees so that new mountain birch can be grown on, as these trees have unique genetics that cannot be lost. And the third step, and arguably the most important step, is addressing overgrazing. If you've been following my videos in Scotland, you're probably tired of hearing about how wild deer and sheep have been eating everything. Believe me, I'm tired of it too. I'm tired because the solution to this problem, in theory, is pretty simple, yet in execution, it's difficult. There's really three main ways that this can be solved, and I believe if we're to see any real regeneration, we must do all of them at the same time. The first is a joined up national approach to deer culling, We've seen the success of it locally, how it can boost rural economies, provide wild meat for communities, and of course, help the land regenerate. The second is fences. Now, fences are only a temporary measure to keep the deer out, but in the short term, they do allow young saplings time to establish. But long term, it's just not a viable solution. And the third way is to reintroduce missing apex predators. First the lynx, a roe deer specialist that would help see some recovery to local woodlands, but then wolves. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that a wolf reintroduction would initiate a trophic cascade in Scotland. But the reality is that we just don't know until we do it. And there you have it. There's the solutions. The reality of implementing all of these will take time, it will take incentives, it will take understanding, and it will take courage. But momentum is building. Whether if it takes 5 years, 50 years, 100 years, or 1,000 years, if we stay on the path of rewilding, we'll get there. And remember the shifting baseline syndrome? Well, it's up to us to ensure that this baseline shifts in a positive trend for future generations, so that we don't let entire habitats fall out of memory. Anyway, they'll have my YouTube videos to watch, so how could they possibly forget? If you've enjoyed this video, then please support Leave Curious by becoming a member and also by subscribing. And don't forget to check out Vivo to see what they can offer you. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Leave Curious.